Hello, everybody. Welcome to this final installment of our series on building this gorgeous scorecard in front of you. So today we are going to be making some mistakes, probably, along this way of wrestling, practicing this mystical art of layout containers in a dashboard. So before we move into our working dashboard that we've been using in the past 5 videos, I do just want to illustrate a bit what it is that's making everything here kind of symmetrical. So this concept of layout containers, it's something that you don't necessarily need to do in a dashboard, but if you've been working with Tableau professionally for a few years, you have probably been forced into this arranged marriage of really getting to know your layout containers and knowing when to use different types. And so that's what we're going to expose you to in this video. So, for example, it is no mistake that, or no coincidence, that these rows here, if we were to look at each one of the heights of all of these objects, they're all 65 pixels tall. Now, in a previous life, I did go through the incredibly mundane and tedious task of trying to arrange layout containers that are floating to be looking like they're all symmetrical. And I am here to tell you there is a better way. You don't need to do that. So let's take a little walk on the wild side of Tableau containers and hop into our working workbook. And this is where we built up everything in the last few videos. And here you can see I was just practicing all this stuff because it had been a month or so since I actually built the dashboard. And I wanted to make sure that I remembered all the things I was up to. So we might be scrolling when we need to reach out in desperation for help. We might scroll over here and take a look at, how did I set padding on a certain layout container? But other than that, we're going to build this up completely from scratch. So before we do build it from scratch, I want to introduce 2 new players in this game. We have some color legends. So as you can see out here in the final product, this is kind of an enhanced version of a color legend. Normally with your color legends, you just get this kind of square look. And if you hover over them, you don't really get a tooltip. So this is nice because we could come in here if we wanted to. We could modify the tooltip and we could have this say whatever we want. But other than that, it's also just a little bit nicer to look at. So how do we actually build this guy over here? I don't want to spend too much time on this because it is a simple worksheet, but I do want to show you that this isn't actually being sourced from real data in my workbook. I decided that I wanted to provide a color legend that would show us when we're looking at these bars out here in the dashboard and it's blue. What does that mean? Well, it means that our current value is higher than the previous value for that visual. And so I wanted to use a custom shape in here. And you can add custom shapes to Tableau. Maybe I'll have a future video on that. For this video, if you don't know how to do that, you could just feel free to select any of the shapes that are available to you. But the way you could build this, if we do it really, really quickly, is you go into a new worksheet, and I'm just going to make some values here. I'm just going to make them the same value, just saying, give me the max of 1. There's no trick there. It's literally just saying, take the max of this number 1, which is 1, just so I can get some number in here that's not really going to change. And then I'm going to drop one of these onto text, and I'll drop another one on top of this guy. Now, just to see what I did there, I dragged this one and you can see how the visual's kind of changing. It does matter where I drop this. You'll notice that I'm going to release it once that rectangle is kind of highlighted in the background. And this is going to lead to Tableau making an assumption of what I want to do, where I have multiple measures in the same view. Measure names, measure values is a topic that we could spend 20 minutes just talking about in and of itself. So if you want to know more about what just happened, then I encourage you to go into Google or onto YouTube, look this up. There are people who've done this explanation in depth. I used to teach Tableau trainings. I know for a fact that there are thousands of trainers out there who will talk your ear off, especially if you buy them a beer, about how this works. So now that we have this looks pretty hideous, right? This isn't actually looking like what we want in our final product, which is this guy. So what do we do? Well, first thing is, let's decide to name this one on the top. Current is above previous, or current is higher. Current value is higher. I already created that when I was practicing this. So let me just add a space there. So this alias is different. So I'm going to edit the alias for this bottom one as well. And I'm going to say lower value is higher, or the same thing, just said a little bit differently. Current value is lower. And again, I already have something named that because I was practicing this. So I'm going to add a little space at the end, so it's technically different. And what we can see here is now I'm just getting into this territory where this color legend is starting to come to life. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, so I do just want to wrap this up with me pointing out that you don't need to look at this in terms of text. You could turn this into a shape. You could also make sure that your measure names over here are giving you different colors. And let's get rid of this guy that's giving us text. And let's get rid, maybe we just force this to detail. So now we still have our measure names and our measure values doing what they need to do, but we have these different shapes with different colors, or sorry, the same shape with different colors. Now, if we wanted to, we could change this to a different shape. So that's going to give us this ability to, at the end of the day, put in whatever shape we want. We can add custom shapes from out in the internet into our Tableau repository, and then we can point to those. That's what I did here to get this kind of oval. And then we can color it as we want. So we could double click on this color legend. We could come in here, edit this color to be anything we want. So just so we don't fiddle with something that's not the most important focus of this video, I've already built this. I built color legend bars, and then we'll see how we can add this into the dashboard. But I did want to give you a basic rundown of what's happening. Like, how do you build a color legend like this that has this kind of tooltip built into it? So then another thing that's new here is this little sheet called label trendline title. And this is basically a trick I like to keep up my sleeve for dashboards where I want to hover over the title within the dashboard and I want to get some extra information. So the effect here is that when we're looking at this visual, it looks like this is the title, but in fact, this is a bunch of different components of my dashboard just arranged in a row, and my title is simply some text that's explaining what's in the visual. But the effect is that this seems to be the title for the trend line. It says price trend for Bitcoin USD, and when I hover over it, it gives me some information. So this is definitely something that is a design pattern of mine. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to do this. I'm not saying that this is a best practice. This is just something I find useful in order to make the dashboard just a little bit more interactive and hide information that doesn't really need to be present unless someone kind of wants to know more about this. Okay. So having introduced these new players to the game, let's actually get into building this thing. So for starters, I'm going to delete this and let's get to making some mistakes and correcting them in real time. So yeah, don't be afraid of mistakes. You're building a dashboard. You're going to want to start out with a dashboard tile here. And I am going to move this to the front of all of the sheet names. It's just a personal preference of mine, but here's a shortcut in case you want to do this. So let's bring this guy out here. Let's make it the very first thing that's available in the workbook. So when you open this up, it's the very first sheet. Now there is nothing in the dashboard. Let's bring in a title for starters. So I'm going to go to dashboard, show title, and let's give this thing a name. I'm going to actually rename my practice one down here. Practice, so that I can name this guy crypto price scorecard. All right. And as basic as that sounds, starting with the title is always a good thing to do, because you can then immediately jump into building the kind of header of your dashboard. So what I want to do is I want to carve out some space for this header. And then this is going to be where things like your filters, in this case we only have one filter in this dashboard, but any drop-down filters and kind of main filters that impact the entire dashboard, it's typically pretty good to put those up here in this top right area. Same goes for this universal kind of color legend. Well, I say universal, this is really only relevant to this section. But if you have color legends that are applicable to multiple components in your dashboard, this might be a good place to put them. This might not even, you could even say that this might not even be the best place for that legend, because some people are of the mind that, well, many people, myself included, that generally you want to put your color legend near the thing that it is legending or describing. So yeah, there's a good case for wanting to move this somewhere, but in any case, that's not going to be the focus of this conversation. Here we want to focus on the layout. So let's just assume this is a good place for our color legend and move forward. So this color legend is belonging in this header. Let's build this header up. So this is going to be our first introduction of a layout container. So to add a layout container into your dashboard, you can go down here to Objects. And I want a layout container for this title, because otherwise there's nothing else. Like if I wanted to put an object next to this, we could see that if I try to, it's not really possible. It's going to let me put something above or below my title, but it's not going to let me put something next to it. And that's what I really want to get this effect, where I have multiple things in the same row, so to speak. So I am going to bring a horizontal layout container into the picture, and let's just drag this up and plop it directly above our title. Now I do want to make sure, I ran out of trackpad there, so I want to make sure this is actually landing where I want it. So you can see that this gray kind of rectangle appears in the background. I don't want to drop it here. I want to drop it here, the very northernmost place I can put it. Now I have this giant layout container, and I have my title. And then I could drag this directly into that layout container, but I want to start talking about a best practice that I'm going to be using if you don't want to waste time. I don't mean that this is a best practice in terms of like there's some documented fact about this approach being very good. I mean that if you want to save yourself the most time in laying out things in your dashboard, you don't want layout containers to mysteriously disappear on you. And I've found over time that if you just drag one single object into a layout container, sometimes it kind of cannibalizes that layout container and doesn't really behave like the horizontal or the vertical layout container you want it to be. So something that you can always do to kind of preserve the integrity of your layout containers is to drop a text object inside of it and just say, this is a placeholder. So now my layout container is staying the way it was. And if I drag my title up here, plop it in on the left, all right, now I clearly have a layout container because I have two things sitting inside of it. So now we can just maybe take this whole thing and make it, let's see what the height of this guy is out here, 80 pixels. So we'll see in a little bit that a lot of times with layout containers, you can actually click on this little triangle and you can edit the height. In this case, we can't edit the height of this, so let's just manually change the layout. And right now this thing is 392 pixels. Let's make sure that we change this to be about 80. We're at 86. We're at 82. 80. All right, I got lucky. Okay, so at this point, I'm also going to introduce another horizontal layout container up here because we can see some behavior happening where I have this title Then I have some blank space just because I kind of wanted all this stuff, well, these two objects to be kind of aligned with this text over here. I didn't want this kind of floating out here in no man's land. So if we want to really control where these two things land eventually in the dashboard, you'll notice here when I click on one of these objects, I can double click on this header and it's going to show me what container these belong to. So these both belong to a horizontal layout container. So let's just make this happen. Let's bring a horizontal layout container. Let's drop it into the picture here. Let's not worry about how hideous this looks for now. Sometimes things need to get worse before they get better. And let's also bring a blank layout container into the picture, or just a blank container. Let's not really call that a layout container. Let's bring that blank object in here. And then I'm going to move this placeholder text over here into this new layout container. All right, so now we have some space carved out over here for where our stuff is eventually going to land in terms of our color legend and in terms of our filter. So now let's worry about carving out some space for our other content. So if we look out here, there's kind of a lot going on in this top section, well, top underneath our header. So let's actually start with the bottom. And to do this, let's think about what kind of content are we putting here? Let's just think at a high level about the type of layout container we're going to need. Now it looks to me like if we scroll through this, what we really want is maybe about half of the dashboard is going to be allocated to this top section, and then half of the dashboard is going to be belonging to this bottom section. And this bottom half is going to include the trend line. It's also going to include this horizontal layout container. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the decision that I really want, at the end of the day, two big layout containers that are kind of dividing my northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere of my dashboard. And so let's do that. Let's first start out with maybe bringing in a layout container just to start with. So let's say I want a vertical layout container here, because vertical is a good idea when you know that you're going to want to stack content vertically. And in this case, at the highest zoomed out level, I have kind of one vertical layout container here that's going to contain all of the individual elements, like maybe it's going to contain multiple horizontal layout containers. And then I'm going to have this second vertical component here that's going to have within it a horizontal layout container and this trend line visual. So if I want to revisit that placeholder concept here, let's start out with just dragging into this layout container that we brought here a placeholder. And now that we have this placeholder in the picture, let's bring two more vertical layout containers. So now we have two vertical layout containers. We have this placeholder. I'm going to get rid of that placeholder because we don't need it anymore. And if I double click onto any one of these individual vertical layout containers, we're going to see that the selection encompasses this outer vertical layout container. Now, I understand this might not be super straightforward to you, but as we move through this process, hopefully this starts to come to life a bit. It starts to illuminate why we did begin with adding these vertical layout containers. So let's focus on this bottom section. And as I add stuff into the mix, I don't want this bottom half to grow and start to cannibalize the space of this top layout container. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click the outer vertical layout container, and I'm going to say, let's distribute the contents evenly. What that means is it's going to allocate the exact same amount of space for this top section as it does for the bottom section. So at this point, I can start to bring real stuff into my dashboard. And I'm going to bring in, for starters, my trend line and this text. If we just talk about this for a second, I did decide to get rid of my regular title. So instead of saying price trend line, here I just have some text where I've decided that I'm going to have some information that's a little bit bold and maybe the text is larger than the rest of the sentence just to indicate the really important parts. So this is saying that black is giving you the actual closing price. Gray is indicating the moving average. And then, of course, we can, inside our text, insert this parameter value. If you go over here to insert, and then we could put in this parameter value of whatever the user has specified as their moving average. All of that was covered in the previous video when we actually built this trend line. So we have that text, but we also want these things in our dashboard. And it looks like these things are all sitting in line horizontally. So that's a really good indication that we want to bring a horizontal layout container into the picture. Now we could also see that if we look at this, these two things are not distributed evenly. So this container up here is not taking up as much space as this trend line is. So this one up top, I just happened to choose 50 pixels of height just arbitrarily. So let's stick to that here. And we can make sure that we set that 50 pixels after we get everything that we want into this container. Sometimes it's easier to just give yourself some extra space to work with when you're placing content, and then you don't have to really fight over dragging something in, but it doesn't quite have enough space to register. That's always super annoying. So we can just give ourselves more real estate to work with. And then at the end of the day, we can come over here and we can edit the height of this entire thing. All right, so we just brought a new layout container into the picture. So the place I want your mind to go to is, let's just first start out with a placeholder. So we have a placeholder in here to kind of maintain the integrity of this thing. And we can also just drag this down since our placeholder is really small. Let's give ourselves some space to work with here. And it looks like the thing that I want to bring in first is going to be this this sheet that is kind of pretending to be a title for my trend line. So let's drop this in. Let's not show the title of the sheet, and let's expand this thing a bit so that we can see just the text that exists within that sheet. So this is a little bit like what we see in our final product. So now let's make sure that this thing is set to fit the entire view of the space in our dashboard that we've allocated for it. And we can worry about fine-tuning the width of this after we bring in everything else we want. But what else we want is a parameter for how many days we're showing in the trend line. We're going to have a text object that just describes that this number in front of it is days in trend line. And then we're going to have another parameter, and then we're going to have some text describing what that parameter is doing, which is giving us the days used in the moving average. All right, so let's bring all those things in. It looks like when we actually brought this sheet in, these parameters hitchhiked along with it, which I guess is fortunate. So we don't have to worry about inserting parameters, but let's drag these where they belong inside the dashboard. By the way, if the parameters didn't hitchhike in with the sheet, you could always click on the sheet inside your dashboard, go over to the drop-down arrow, and then select parameters and bring in the parameters that you want. Same goes for filters. So good thing to know. Now we want this days in trend line parameter to be here. We want some text to come up next to that says days in trend line. Let's make sure that that's correct. Yep, days in trend line, and then days used in moving average. And let's also make sure that this is maybe a little bit bigger text, 10-point font. Let's make this just a wee bit darker. And then I'm going to copy this so I don't have to redo the formatting when I make the next text box. Which, you know what, I'm just going to overwrite this placeholder. It's already conveniently here. And I pasted in that other text, but now we don't have days in trend line. We want this one to be days used in moving average. And we need to bring this parameter down and plop that in place. Whoops, looks like we still need a placeholder in here. This is why these placeholders are useful, because they actually keep the existence of that layout container in check You notice how before I didn't have a placeholder up here in this layout container, and once I dragged the only object that existed in it, which happened to be this parameter at the time, that layout container just disappeared on me. So this is why I say it's a best practice to put placeholders in your layout containers, because otherwise weird stuff is liable to happen. All right, so we have everything that we need down here, but it looks kind of hideous. So how do we get it to look like this? So for starters, let's get the widths of these things the way that we want them. So maybe this should only be as wide as it really needs to be. So right up to where this text ends. And then for this guy, let's get rid of the header here. We don't need to show the title for this parameter. We want it to be almost as invisible as possible. Maybe we still want the outline around it because we want people to kind of get the feel that this is a parameter and that you could click into it and interact with this number. But now we also don't want this to be chilling so far up here. So maybe at this point, it's safe for us to select this entire thing, edit the height. By the way, how do I select that entire thing? I click on one of the objects inside this horizontal layout container, and then I double click on that object, and it's going to select the parent element of the dashboard. In this case, that horizontal layout container. So now that I've selected this entire horizontal layout container, I can say, let's edit the height. Let's make this 50 pixels tall. And this is already starting to look a little bit more like this guy. But we still need to mess with this width. This one, this has no business being, 4 million pixels wide. So let's go ahead and edit this width. And I'm going to say, let's make this maybe 50 pixels wide. That looks good to me. And then this one could be, let's see, maybe 150. Well, maybe even 100. Let's see what I decided out here before. Yeah, it looks like about 150 is what I landed on before. So let's just leave this at 150. And then this parameter, we don't need the title. And we also want this to be about 50 pixels. That's at least a good starting point. Yeah, I'm happy with that. And then this one as well, we can actually leave this as is. I think that's, for some reason I put a blank layout container out here in the original dashboard, but I don't really think we need it. So let's just leave this as is. And then now it still looks a little bit weird. Like, why is this parameter floating up here? So just like it's important to get a feel for how layout containers work, it's also good to get a feel for how you can pad the margin or the inner padding of your objects that are in your dashboard. So if I click on this parameter here, and I realize that I want to force it down a bit, then I can go to, don't want to double click on it. I can go over here to layout. And this is going to be showing me some layout properties for whatever I've selected in my dashboard. So you can see how this changes depending on what I click on. So for this parameter, it currently has some outer padding. The outer padding is all set at 4. And I'm just going to say I'm fine with that. I don't really want to mess with that right now, as long as maybe changing some of the inner padding gets me what I want. So a lot of times, if I just want to change the vertical placement of this object within its container, I could just mess with, first of all, unchecking that all sides will be equal. Because if I put a number here on top, let's say I put 4, if all sides are equal, it's going to just automatically put 4 for everything. So let's make sure that we start out at 0 here. But then I'm going to say I don't want all sides to be equal. And let's maybe give ourselves 12 from the top, 12 from the bottom. That actually does not look like what I want. So let's try maybe 6 at the top, 6 from the bottom. That looks a little bit more where I want it to be. If we come out here, we can see I gave 12 at the top, 12 at the bottom, but in the final product, I decided that we didn't need any outer padding. So you know what, let's just trust myself, who worked on this for much longer than how we're going to work on it in this video. And let's say we want everything up here to be 0. And then down at the bottom, we're going to make this be 12 at the top, 12 at the bottom. And even if that's overkill, I think we might even be able to set this to like 20 and 20. Nope, actually 12 and 12 is good. So then if you were getting one of these like the bottom part is getting blanked out, like here, let's say I have 20. You see how that bottom line has kind of disappeared? Whereas over here, we still have a bottom line. That's just an indication that you've given too many pixels. So 12 and 12 it looks good for this. And now that we've beaten that horse to death, talking about the pixels for that one parameter, let's just do the same thing over here for this parameter. Let's start out by setting the outer padding to 0. And then let's go down to inner padding. And let's say my top is going to get 12. My bottom's going to get 12. And now we should be in this nice situation where the just the look of this is that we have a title that's kind of advanced. This title seems to be interactive. We can change the number of days in our trend line. And that's exactly what we want. Then the title for the worksheet itself is just kind of more subtle, and it's giving us some information about what we're seeing in the visual. All right, so now we have the bottom part of our dashboard really figured out, and let's focus on maybe figuring out the rest of our header up here. So this down here is actually filtered. This trend line's filtered to one cryptocurrency. So let's go ahead and bring in what that filter is. So I could do that by clicking on this little drop down. So I click on this sheet. I click on this little drop down arrow to give me options for this sheet. And I can go to filters and I can say, give me that symbol, that crypto symbol, aliased uppercase. So if you recall, this is actually a filter that's going to allow us to, if we select, give me a single value drop down, it's going to allow us to pick one crypto symbol at a time. But we don't want this to be down here because this filter is supposed to impact everything in the dashboard. Let's go ahead and drop this up top in the top right for now. And we can see that if I check this layout container, it has the placeholder in it, it has our filter in it, and now we want one more thing up here in this header. We are going to want the legend. So if we change to this little dashboard button up here in the top left, we can see all of our sheets once again. And let's go ahead and bring the color legend in. Let's drop it just to the right of our filter. And let's get rid of the title on that. And then let's figure out the layout for this. We want this to fill up the entire view so that we don't have, here's what it looked like before, this kind of awkward situation where it's not occupying all the space available to it. So let's change this to fit the entire view. And then let's give this maybe just a little bit of a touch up in terms of the layout. So perhaps if we leave the outer padding as is, we might still want to change the inner padding. I might want to force these to be a little bit closer together and maybe make sure that it has enough space from the side. So what I'm going to do is give it some inner padding. I'm going to say maybe give me like 4 or 6 pixels at the top. Give me 4 pixels from the left. We could just see how dramatic this could be if I said like 10. You can just see this gets a little more space. 10's fine for me right now. Let's just leave that as is. And now we really have our header the way we want it. We have 3 things in this horizontal layout container. So let's toss out the placeholder at this point because we don't really need it. And well, it looks like that kind of changed how these things are spread out. So let's do a little bit of movement here. And that's looking a little bit better for me. All right. So am I happy with how this filter's laid out? I might want to do the same thing over here where I update my inner padding and force this down by, let's say 6, maybe 10 pixels. Yeah, there we go. I just didn't like how high up this filter title was sitting in this header. It was a little bit awkward. Okay, so let's say we're happy with that. Even if you're like a perfectionist and you want this text to be completely aligned with this one, that's fine. I'll leave that to you as an exercise to figure out exactly what that pixel is. Because for us, we're going to come down here, get rid of this this measure names legend that came in. It hitchhiked its way in while we dragged this sheet into the picture. So let's get rid of that. And now let's focus on this this final section of the dashboard, which is where we're going to bring in all of these elements that give us the bars, telling us how any given period compared to its previous period, and then the text describing that in written form. So for just before we start dragging stuff into the dashboard, let's really think about this. It looks like what I want is, first of all, a row for each of these sections. Each row should have it should be of equal height to all the others. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those different rows. All of them get the same height, which tells me that inside my vertical layout container, I'm going to have 5 horizontal containers. But then even within each of those horizontal containers, I'm going to want this to be the equal width as this. I want these two things to take up the same amount of space, but I also want this kind of label sitting here at the side. And I want all of these labels to be the same width. We can see here all of these are 100 pixels wide, so that all of these bars are starting in the same place. All right, how do we bring this to life? Let's leave this little placeholder in here for now, and let's start to just drag in some empty layout containers. So I'm going to bring in my horizontal layout container, just one of them at the beginning. Now let's bring in our second one, and you can see that the visual kind of changes. What I really want to make sure I do is drop it here between the first layout container I had and my placeholder. This is just one more reason why these placeholders are so useful. They kind of give you an anchor, like a pivoting point from which you can kind of, like if you only had that one layout container in the picture, if you dragged another one in on top of it, you might just be replacing the first one you had. So this really gives us some ground to stand on as we bring new things into this extra real estate. So I'm going to bring in another horizontal container. And now at this point, I think I can probably just put them, I can bring these in anywhere as long as I'm dropping them in this kind of dashed line type view. And that's going to be doing what I want, which is bringing in a new, with a new container with complete equality to all the others. And at this point I have 4, so let's bring in one more. And at this point, something I want to do is go ahead and toss out the placeholder, because now I have 5 of these rows, but let's double click one of those layout containers so that we select the parent layout container, and let's tell this that everything in here should be distributed evenly. So what that's going to do is it's going to make sure that even as we start to drag content into our first container, it's not going to expand that container and eat up all of its neighbors who don't have any content in them yet. It's going to lock everything into this space that we've defined for each of our rows. Now for each of these rows, let's just bring in the text that we want. So for this one, this container needs to have some text that's going to say daily, and then this one down here is going to be weekly, and we're going to have a monthly, and we are going to have quarterly, and then surprise, we are going to have yearly as well. So we have our text in the picture, and we don't just want text in here. We actually want this to have a layout container next to that text. So let's bring horizontal layout container into the picture next to each one of these pieces of text. And if we want to at this point, we could try to click and drag this to the appropriate width, but I'm just going to edit my width, and I'm going to say, let's make this 100 pixels wide. And I think that's what we had out here. Just want to make sure that that's correct. All right, so 100 pixels wide, and then we need to bring a horizontal layout container out here as well. Notice that it does matter where I drop this. If I just drop a new horizontal layout container here, that's going to give me a new row. I don't really want that. I want to make sure I'm dropping this inside this row. So you can see that dark blue border kind of giving me the area that encompasses my weekly real estate. And I drop this in place, and now I can edit the width for my weekly, make this 100. And now these are the same exact width. And now I can come in, I can do the same for monthly, quarterly, and yearly. So I'll just try to do this more quickly because you don't need to hear the same story 5 times. So we've got monthly locked in. We have quarterly now locked in. And let's do the same. Let's do this for yearly as well. Oh, whoops, did something wrong there. I think I brought in text object. All right, so yearly is going to be 100 pixels wide. And now, before I do anything else, I want to make sure that each one of these horizontal layout containers that I have put into the picture here, each of these needs to be distributing its contents evenly so that we make sure that there's equal space for our bars and equal space for the text. So now what we can do is we could just start bringing in my bars. And let's kill these color legends as they appear, because we don't need those. But I brought in my daily. Let's go ahead and hide that title, hide the title for my weekly, bring in the monthly, bring in the quarterly, bring in the yearly. Let's hide all of these titles. We don't need them. And then let's come over here and let's make sure we give the axe to all of these legends that are not needed because we made this one legend to kind of rule them all up top. Now, before we fiddle with making sure that the bar looks the way that we want in terms of padding or anything like that, let's make sure that our text, when we bring it in, is getting equal love inside this this container. So let's just go ahead and drag in all the different varieties of text we have. We have day, week, month. For some reason, struggling here to drag this one into the picture. Might have been dragging the wrong thing. Told you we were going to be making some mistakes. Consider that promise fulfilled. All right, we got our quarter, have our year. Whoops, that can happen too. Drop that in the wrong place. All right, so now we are going to go through, we're going to hide the title for each of these and watch the magic come to life, at least for our daily. And then we are going to see, things aren't really shaping out for these other ones the way we wanted them to. So before we handle making the bar look a little bit less starved and give it a little bit more room to really live its best life over there, let's focus on the text over here. So I click on this text, and the thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, this is kind of a very small amount of real estate to be putting this much text. So I don't want to be doing any of this outer padding thing. I want to get rid of this. Let's just set this to 0 so that this can really stretch its legs. And maybe we want to give it a little bit of padding there on the left, but I'm going to leave that up to you. I'm not really going to mess with that here, but we could. And once again, you could do that either for your outer padding or you could do that for your inner padding. And if you wanted to do it just for the left, make sure you uncheck all sides equal. And that would allow you to come in here and say, give me 5, give me 10, whatever. I'm just going to leave it at 0. And then we can come down here. We can do the same thing. So make sure that there's enough breathing room for our text to display. We do that for all of this. And now something that I'm noticing that I don't really like is that the text sometimes spills over to a new line. So what I'm actually going to do really quickly, I'm going to see if this can be prevented just by simply going into the worksheet and filtering the price for the current period, and just see if I can get rid of the 2 decimal places. Let's see what that does for our dashboard out here. Yeah, it looks like that does the trick. So another thing that we could do though is we could decide that we want to push this entire thing down a little bit more, but that would require us selecting the outer parent container, this one, and saying, don't distribute the contents evenly. But we can see that that's very much something we can do. And now everything that was a problem before is no longer a problem. In any case, that's up to you. I kind of like the idea of having this have the same amount of real estate as the bottom section. So I'm going to undo this, and I'm just going to say, if we really wanted to take everything that was spilling over, we could go into our dashboard, our worksheets, and we could change the formatting of those numbers so that there's no more spilling over. But again, I'll leave that as an exercise to you if you care about the formatting to that degree. So for this one, let's make sure that this has 0 padding, this has 0 padding. And you know what? It's annoying me enough. I'm just going to go in and make sure that this is formatted to only show just messing with my style a little bit. So I'm going to make sure that this is a US dollar amount. It's only giving me to 0 decimal places. Same thing for the previous quarter. We can do that for our monthly text as well. All right, that one's already formatted. Previous period, go down to currency, give me 0 decimal places, give me dollars, and then let's do quarter. Looks like that one's already formatted. And finally, year. Now I could also go out and change the format for all of these at the data source level, but in this case, I don't really want to do that because I'm only concerned about this specific visual and the problems it's causing here. But yeah, if you always want this number to be formatted a certain way, don't do what I'm doing here. Instead, I'll show you in just a second, you could go out to your data pane and you could change the formatting for all of these numbers in one go. So that's an option to you. I'm also going to point out that in the actual finished dashboard here, there's something very complex kind of that I do behind the scenes of determining, like, for these cryptocurrency pairs, maybe some of them, it doesn't make sense to show them in units of thousands. In this dashboard, we've just gone ahead and made the assumption that we're looking at Bitcoin, we're looking at Ethereum. These are expensive cryptocurrency assets, so they're always going to be in units of thousands, unless something terrible happens. But then for some of these currencies, they might be much smaller values, and so you could build some formulas that kind of dynamically determine, is this thing in units of 100s, or is this in units of tens or thousands or millions? And then it will format your number for you accordingly. Maybe I'll make a video on that in the future, but for now, this video is long enough as is, and let's get back to this formatting picture. So we now have this situation where we kind of fixed all of our width formatting over here so that everything fits into just 3 lines of text. That's nice, keeps everything symmetrical. And now let's deal with this over here. I'm really not impressed by how these bars are looking at the moment. So what we can do to fix this is we can, first of all, tell all these bars to fit the entire room. And now instead of them being super skinny, they've kind of packed on the pounds a little bit here. Not to body shame my dashboard at all, but there's always room for improvement, right? And I can come in here and I can say, all right, let's hit the gym on this bit for this bar, and let's tighten that up, get this thing into the best shape of its life, And the way we can do that is we can come over here to layout. We can say, don't give me all sides being 4. Instead, make that 0. Then we can go down to our inner padding and we can say, give me like 12 at the top. Whoops, we actually want to start this out at 0. Let's say 12 at the top, 12 at the bottom. And if you want to, you could do this even more. You could say, give me 20 at the top, 20 at the bottom, and you're going to get an even thinner bar. You're basically closing in on that bar from the top and the bottom individually. And I like the 12 and 12. That's giving me actually, I say I like that, but let's see, 16 maybe, and 16. That's kind of a sweet spot for me, because these really thick bars kind of look a bit tacky, in my opinion. So yeah, let's definitely make them about this thickness. It gives us enough breathing room for our text, but it also just isn't as distracting as these massive kind of like 1990s style visual bars. So we, once again, down here, we can do that process once more. We say fit entire view, or we've already done that. We click in onto this item, we go to layout, we say give me 0 in terms of the outer padding, but do give me some inner padding. So the inner padding is going to not be all sides equal, but the top is going to have 16, the bottom's going to have 16. So we can just go through this exercise for each of these bars. Give me 0 outer padding, give me 16 inner padding for my top and my bottom. And then we only have to do this for 2 more. I finally clicked out of it without canceling my selection. Told you there were going to be mistakes. Now outer padding for our yearly, we get rid of this one more time, and we can set our inner padding to be 16 and 16. All right, and that's really about it. This is the final place that we're landing for building up this dashboard. We've taken this scorecard that we see out here, and they're not a 100% match from one to the other, because there are some extra time-consuming things I have done here. As I mentioned before, the dynamic units. But in terms of the core dashboard and getting our time period comparisons, this is really giving us the same effect as this dashboard out here. And that really wraps up building this thing up from concept to completion. I hope you've enjoyed this series. And one final thing maybe we want to make sure we do is when you have this filter on the dashboard, this came from one sheet. And so something we want to make sure is that this filter, as we interact with it, is this going to be impacting all of our sheets? Right now it isn't, right? You say, oh no, I chose Ethereum and only my trend line changed. So what we want to do is come down here to apply to worksheets for this filter. And we can say, I want this to apply to selected sheets. And I'm just going to say, apply this to everything on the dashboard. Maybe not my color legend, maybe not anything else that's not really using any of our real data in it. But now if I click OK, we can see that this down here updates to say price trend for Ethereum. If we change this back to Bitcoin, wow, it looks like it's been pretty good for Ethereum. If we go back to Bitcoin, we can see that that things are going pretty much just as well. Maybe down month over month, but only slightly. Absolutely outrageous year over year price growth. But yeah, now we end up seeing the entire dashboard change depending on this filter selection. So with that, no more juking you out. That is actually the end of this video. And if you've enjoyed this, check out future videos. For the next few weeks, we'll be diving into more of the REST API territory and doing things in Python, automating various aspects of your Tableau server environment. So until next time, thanks for tuning into this video. Hope you found it valuable and useful.